Hi everyone. Today's movie will feature the auto throttle system of the 737. The whole auto flight system is pretty complicated and I split it up in a couple parts, so we'll concentrate on the auto throttle system that works in conjunction with the rest but can also work separately, and that's what I'll show you now. We'll start with the basic control items, the knobs and switches that make the auto throttle work. They're on the left hand side of the mode control panel. You can see that here in the center of the picture. The main switch, auto throttle arm and off. Then you have the N1 and speed buttons. You also have the speed cursor that you can use to increment or decrement the speed. And I'll pan over a little bit and you see that it moves the orange airspeed cursor in the Mach airspeed indicator and also the magenta airspeed bug in the E80i speed tape. A little further down we have the thrust limit annunciator. It shows the current maximum thrust that the auto throttle will set when it's in the N1 maximum thrust mode. Right now it's TO, that means takeoff. That's full rated takeoff thrust. And you can also move those cursors, the N1 limit, manually, and you see that moving up and down as I turn that knob, push it back in, and the automation takes control again. Of course, important buttons are here on the thrust levers. You have the auto throttle disengage buttons, and you also have the so-called toga buttons that you use to trigger some autopilot modes. And let's continue with some basic operation. We can do that here on the ground, on the runway, with the parking brake set. First we'll have to turn on the auto throttle system. It goes into ARM. You can see the flight mode annunciator and the E80i say ARM with a green box. Green box means the mode has changed, stays for 10 seconds. If I flip that back to off, you get the orange or red push to reset warning light flashing. That warns you that the auto throttle has been disengaged, so you're aware of that. That's another way to turn it off, the auto throttle disconnect button on the thrust lever that you would use with your thumb while you fly the airplane. Let's see what happens if I arm the system and then hit the toga button on the thrust levers. That's what you would do during a takeoff or a go-around. You see the thrust levers advance, the auto throttle system sets the maximum limit, in this case takeoff thrust, N1, and all the parameters rev up, and the airplane struggles to go forward. Of course, still the brake set so it will not move. And you can see here N1 is in the leftmost column of the flight mode annunciation. I deselect this mode. That's one of the second laws of the autopilot system. If a button is lit, that means that it can be deselected. And I try to regain control of the thrust levers. I have to move my joystick up to the exact same position. Then it grabs the thrust levers and I can move them again. We have to do this feature because obviously you cannot move the joystick thrust levers physically. Okay, power came back to idle. Now I'll demonstrate the speed mode. And you can see the flight mode annunciation. It goes to MCP, which means mode control panel speed. It tries to achieve the 134 knots set there. Of course, it can't do it while we're on the ground, and goes to the current limit thrust again, takeoff. I deselect that mode again. The auto throttle goes back to ARM, and I grab the thrust levers again with my joystick throttle, move them back to idle. Okay, let's see how all this works in a real life situation. We'll do a takeoff, manual, no flight director takeoff, but with the aid of the auto throttle. That's what you would do if you were to hand fly the airplane. No one sets takeoff thrust manually. You can do it, of course, but you use the auto throttle to help you. On the N1 limit page, I put in an assumed temperature. That means I derate the takeoff power a little bit, and you see I will put in 45 degrees, and the TO will change to RTO, which means reduced takeoff thrust, and the target N1 also goes down a little bit. Another feature of the auto throttle is the automatic setting of climb thrust after takeoff. I access the second takeoff page, and you can see there on the bottom row that it's currently set to 1500 above ground level. That's the standard, and you can change that to different altitude if you choose so. I just put in 1600 now for kicks, and then the auto throttle will actually automatically engage climb thrust at 1600 feet above the departure airport. Release the parking brake, and let's just go. Flaps are already set to 5, and I advance the thrust levers manually with my joystick to about 40% and then hit the toga button, takeoff go round buttons, and the auto throttle kicks in. It engages in N1 mode, and the power will be set to the selected takeoff power. You can see the airplane accelerate, and at 84 knots the flight mode enunciation will change to throttle hold. That's a safety feature right there. Means that now power is removed from the servos, so a malfunction will not accidentally yank back the thrust levers in this critical takeoff phase. Rotate the airplane off the ground, and at about 400 feet you can see that the throttle hold will revert to arm. At this point I could just move them manually if I choose so, but I will just leave them there. They will not change, and I will still climb out with the takeoff power I selected. Now watch for the next event. That's the 1600 feet above ground level, and the arm should change to N1 again. You can see the limit thrust has changed to CLB, climb, and that's the new power that is now set. In this case, really nothing happened because the climb thrust is pretty much the same as the reduced takeoff thrust, and I will show you if I access the N1 limit page. You can manually select the current N1 limit, and I will select climb 2, which is reduced climb. You can see R, CLB, and the power gets actually reduced somewhat. Another very useful feature of the auto throttle is actually the reversion modes. It watches the air speed, the angle of attack, and I will first show you the alpha floor protection. I'm getting too slow here, and as the angle of attack gets too big, you can see an A start flashing in the speed selection window. Right here it is, and MCP speed mode becomes active. The thrust levers come forward, engines rev up to save the aircraft from stalling. And exit that mode here, get back to manual control of the thrust levers, deselect speed, add a little power. Now I'll show again, EADI zoomed in. You can see the arm change to MCP speed there as I get too slow, and the speed cursor jumps just to above the red and black bar. That's just above the stick shaker speed, and it saves the aircraft by adding power. Similar thing happens when you get too fast. I'm at flaps 10 right now, limit is 210 knots, and I have the autopilot on in control wheel steering pitch and roll to help me stabilize the aircraft a bit. Getting too fast, and you will see this time the overspeed symbol start flashing. It looks like a filled out 8 on the speed selection window, and MCP speed mode come alive again right here. Reduce power to save the aircraft from overstressing. Next shot I would like to show you how the auto throttle actually maintains speed, 170 knots right here. As I get slower, it will start advancing thrust to maintain that 170 knots. We do not recommend to fly manually with the auto throttle controlling speed because that upsets the aircraft in the pitch axis too much. It's easier to anticipate those pitch changes from the low mounted engines when you fly manually. Also watch the trim move as I increase speed here. The nose pitches up from the power, and the trim automatically, the autopilot trims down to counter that. I'd also like to show you that if I engage the flight level change mode right here, you see that the auto throttle, which was in speed mode before, now jumps to N1 mode. That's a combination with certain autopilot modes that also makes the auto throttle change modes or engage if it was an arm. Right now I will hit altitude hold, and you will see it automatically jumps to MCP speed, capturing the current airspeed. That's a safety feature, so you don't accidentally get too fast or too slow. And more about the autopilot system in the next movie.